Elie Mystal. Elie Mystal is the nation's justice correspondent and host of its legal podcast, Contempt of Court. He has the new cover piece for The Nation magazine that's called How Trump Could Remake the Supreme Court for a Generation. He's the author of the book, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, and his forthcoming book, which will be out in March, is called Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws that Are Ruining America. We'll have him back to talk about that book when it comes out. Elie Mystal, it's a great.
Mitch, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, it's terrible out here.
Are you in DC?
Every day is a new illegal action, and you kind of read through what he's done, and you read through the laws, and you're like, these laws used to matter. And now apparently they don't. And that can be very frustrating and depressing.
I should have known this before we began, but you said out here. Are you in Washington, D.C.?
I'm in New York.
Okay.
I'm based out of New York. I did my time in D.C. Wasn't for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an acquired taste.
Very company town. The summer I spent in D.C., I'm a big Met fan, and the summer I spent in D.C. was the only summer that I had no idea what was going on with the Mets, because it was just, you're working it's a very hardworking city. You're working all the time. And so I've kind of retreated back to my home base here in Westchester, New York.
Well, you're in New York, and this is where some of these very important lawsuits are coming from. Just overall, as we begin, what's your sense of what's happening and what seems to be a showdown? A lot to be still determined. We don't know exactly where this is going to go. But how are you viewing this potential or maybe even current confrontation between Trump, his administration, and the courts?
Yeah, so we're in a constitutional crisis right now. It's not looming, it's not coming, it's not just over the horizon. We are in it right now, because right now Trump is violating court orders, right? He's been there's a temporary injunction saying that he can't do his funding freeze, his funding pause, but he hasn't turned the money back on, right? Like straight up. So that is a point and click violation of a court order, and we're about to see whether or not that matters, right? And so one of the things that I've been writing about for The Nation is that people need to understand, and I'm not a nihilist, I'm not a cynic, I'm very sad and depressed, but I try to be realistic about our situation, and people need to understand what realistically courts can and cannot do. Courts do not have enforcement powers. They don't have an army. They don't have a police force. They have no law enforcement. We rely on the executive. We rely on the president in the federal context and the governors in the state context to enforce court orders. So what happens when the American people elect a would-be orange dictator who doesn't think that he is responsible or needs to enforce court orders? Well, you have what's happening right now, where Trump is not willing to enforce court orders against himself. But Mitch, that isn't even the thing that I'm most worried about, because the thing that I'm most worried about is what Trump's co-president Elon Musk is doing, right? And while we do not think that Trump will enforce court orders against himself, you'd have to be naive. You'd have to be borderline stupid to think that Trump is going to enforce a court order against his bro, Elon Musk, right? And so like Elon Musk right now is operating not just above or outside the law, he's operating outside the law with no credible threat of ever bringing him back into the fold. Elon Musk, who, I'll just remind people, nobody elected. So that's where the showdown is. The courts have made their rulings. Trump is just not following it. And whether or not the American people care about that becomes the next question. Right now, Trump's approval ratings are as high as they've ever been. Yeah. So there's no indication that the American people either understand what's happening or, and I don't want to say understand, because I think that was, one of my mistakes, one of the liberals' mistakes, one of the left's mistakes leading up to the last election. I think we have to stop saying that people don't understand what's going on. I think we have to confront the reality that people understand what's going on well enough and don't care. And I think that's what I'm still waiting to see. It's not, you understand that he's violating the orders. It'd be helpful if the media was a little bit more clear-eyed about that. But people can see what's happening. Are they going to care? Are they going to do anything? And I think that's still an open question.
And another recent piece that you have in the Nation magazine is about this. The courts can't stop the Trump-Musk coup. We did a show last week about this word coup. You do think this is a coup that's occurring?
Yeah, I mean, look, if we were reporting on this in another country, how would we report on it, right? Like, I think it's the best kind of conceptual way to think about it, right? If an unelected oligarch took control of another country's government payroll, they took control of another country's, tax, private tax ID and information, how would we describe what's going on in that other country, right? We would say that there has been an extra governmental oligarchical takeover or coup d'etat of that other nation, where the elected legitimate rulers are no longer the people elected are no longer the only ones in charge of their nation. That's how we report on it. If it was happening in Guatemala, that's how we report on it. If it was happening in Angola, and that's how we should be reporting on it when it's happening here.
Donald Trump and Elon Musk took a few questions from the Oval Office, from the press yesterday. I want to ask you about a couple of comments that were made. One was by Donald Trump himself saying that he will abide by the courts. They're going to appeal these decisions, but he said he would always abide by the courts. You do not take that at face value.
Oh, okay. So first of all, and I'll just keep coming back to this, Mitch, he's already not abiding by the courts, right? Like this idea that he will abide in the future belies the fact that he's not abiding about a court order now. Yes, he has the opportunity to appeal, and he has appealed, but while the appeal is pending, he is supposed to turn the money back on, and he hasn't done that, right? So in his mind, he thinks that he doesn't have to follow the court order until potentially it's final, until potentially the Supreme Court weighs in. I mean, it's always dangerous to try to guess at the two marbles rolling around in that man's head, but I'm going to assume that what he's thinking is that he will abide by a Supreme Court order, right? And maybe he will. We don't know that yet, but that's the promise that he's making, right? Because right now on the ground, he is not abiding by a court order. So why would anybody believe that he will in the future, right? The second thing, and the second problem here, is that, and this really goes to Musk's comments, right? Is that we're at that Oval Office meeting, is that we're operating kind of like on a trust me, bro situation, right? There's no independent accounting of whether or not these orders are being filed or not. There's no independent accounting of whether or not Elon Musk has limited his access as the court has ordered to him that he agreed to abide by, right? If you think about data, right? Like that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about the Musk coup, right? Just the raw access to data. Where are the forensic accountants? Where are the forensic investigators? Where are the digital forensic investigators? Where's the geek squad coming over to make sure that Elon Musk is abiding by the rules? There is none, right? We've got Elon Musk saying, "Yo, trust me, I'm gonna do it. It's fine." We got Trump saying, "Yo, it's great. It's gonna be the biggest abiding by the orders ever," right? But there's no accountability. The Supreme Court has said that Trump is free to commit crimes. So if he, there's the reason you could say that I have trust issues, but it's not that I have trust issues. It's that I want there to be an independent accountability for what these people are doing. And right now there is none.
The speed of all this, I think, is remarkable. And I feel like is not noticed enough. The fact, let's just say they're doing a legitimate audit on each of these agencies and each of these departments. That takes time. Like you actually have to do a thorough investigation to go through a lot of information and figure out what's what and et cetera, et cetera. And they're claiming after just a few days of having access to this data, they know where the what they call, they haven't proved any corruption. They're just basically programs that they disagree with. But I mean, it's just how, again, if you do an audit, this is something actually, if you're going to do it responsibly, takes time.
It also takes knowledge. You have to understand how the government works, which Musk and Trump do not. I mean, you need expertise to understand how some of these programs work, why this money is going that way and that money is going this way, right? Like that takes like actual expertise and knowledge, and they have none of it. They have no understanding of how government works. They have no understanding. They barely have an understanding of basic civics. And again, nobody's checking their work. And then you get to the fact that they're trying to say within a week and a half they've uncovered all of this corruption. Like it's just that's how we know they're lying. I mean, frankly, that is how we know they're lying because they cannot have done what they say they've done in the time allotted with any level of surety or skill or competency. They're just making it up as they go along. And as you say, Mitch, we don't like this program, so now it's corrupt. No, you might not like it. That doesn't mean it's corrupt. If it's corrupt, you're going to again need to bring in the Geek Squad, bring in the forensic accountants, bring in the forensic investigators, and interview. They got to interview people.
Yeah.
Right. They just got one of the things that you do in an audit, right, is that you bring in the taxpayer and you talk to them and they bring receipts and then they go back home and then they bring more receipts. Right. I saw this in Everything Everywhere All at Once. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Right. You kind of, Michelle Yeoh goes home and brings in her shoebox. Right. Like that's how it actually works. They haven't even taken the time to talk to these people. So again, that's how we know they're lying. I wish the media was more clear-eyed and courageous to just say that because it's obvious.
Language is so important here, and the abuse of language by, again, just calling these fraud and waste, which they haven't actually shown any fraud and waste. They're just showing things they don't like and just saying it's fraud and waste. And it's just sort of, you say it enough and that's what it becomes. It's the same thing that we see with their approach towards immigrants, specifically undocumented immigrants. You just say it enough that these are criminals that are creating, horrendous crimes. And it just sort of becomes the narrative out there, even though we know that within immigrant communities, immigrants are far less likely to commit violent crimes than the general population. So what we're also witnessing here is just an abuse of language for a political goal.
I think that's right, but I kind of go back to this is what the American people wanted. And, I can argue, I have argued in the past that these lies that Trump tells, these lies that Elon Musk tells were confusing people and making people, they didn't know what was going on. And I basically, I'm trying to give people more credit than that now, right? I'm trying to live in a world where people understand that they're being lied to, understand these, the facts that we keep saying about undocumented immigrants and how they're less likely to be committing crimes than born here American citizens, right? Like I'll allow for the fact that there are many people hooked into the kind of Fox News ecosystem that never get that information. All right. Like I'm not saying that people are informed, right? There are people who are locked in and kind of can't be saved from their misinformation news cycles. But even the people who are locked into that ecosystem understand that not every single immigrant, every single undocumented immigrant, even in this country, is a criminal. Like that's just basic common sense. People understand that, but these people, these MAGA people, are willing to deport them all, are willing to throw them all away. So even their argument, well, they're criminals. That's not actually the reason why they support mass deportation, right? Because even in a misinformation ecosphere, common sense dictates that not every single one of these undocumented people are criminals, yet every single one of them is potentially deportable under the Trump mass deportation policies, and they like that. So I think we have to start giving them the credit and the blame for their own decisions. They want this evil. They want this horror. They think it will help them. And that is more the problem than the misinformation they are being fed by Fox News. Because even though I agree it's misinformation and it's bad and it's, whatever, at core, these are people who want bad things.
That this is a popular will for a form of authoritarianism?
Mm-hmm.
that we see in
And
other
people
places
forget when you
too.
study history, it almost always is in the first instance. You know, Hitler was popular, Stalin was popular, Augustus Caesar was popular, authoritarians are popular, Napoleon was popular. Like you can't get to the point where you are an authoritarian without being popular, right? That's actually part of the job. It's why demagogues tend to rise to this position because they are popular, you know, because they have a way with words, because they make people in the majority feel a certain level of safety and security that they didn't feel in the rough and tumble world of an active democracy. People forget democracy is a contact sport, right? You're not always going to feel good about it. You're not always going to feel like things are going in the right direction. Authoritarianism, you can just, it's like a drug. It's like it's a Xanax, right? You can just go, oh, well, the great leader is taking care of it. I don't gotta worry about it. What's coming up on 3rd and 10? Like you can just shut it off. You don't have to think with an authoritarian, and not having to think about these things, not having to worry about these things is a comfort to a lot of people, right? Not me, but not doesn't sound like you, Mitch, but like, to a lot of people that is comforting to them. And so, yeah, of course he's popular. And this goes back to, again, my article in The Nation about what the courts can and cannot do. The courts are not designed to stop a democratically elected president. That's not their check. That's not their role, right? They're not designed to stop democratic majorities and institutions, except for in the rarest of cases where those institutions run afoul of the Constitution. Now, I would argue, in fairness, that the court has used its power of judicial review and declaring acts of the democratically elected branches unconstitutional, has used it too often in the past 20, 30 years, right? That's an argument that I made. It's an argument I was making, last year when they were blocking student loan relief, right? Like, I think the court has overused its power, but and we know that this court won't overuse that power in the face of Trump, because the Supreme Court at least, has been captured by Republican justices. But even in a kind of overuse of their power of judicial review, they're not designed to stop the man. They're designed to put some speed bumps in there, right? And that's what we're seeing.
This is Letters and Politics, and we are in conversation with Elie Mystal, Nation's justice correspondent and host of its legal podcast, Contempt of Court, author of the book Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution. His forthcoming book out in March is called Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. He also has the cover piece for the upcoming edition of The Nation magazine called How Trump Could Remake the Supreme Court for a Generation. I'll ask you about that in a moment. I want to come back to this idea of democracy and something that Elon Musk said yesterday when talking to reporters. And I really wish we can get Elon Musk into a congressional hearing, because there's so much I don't really understand about exactly what's going on, like who's making the decision to make these cuts. Is this just see only and we're making recommendations to the president and that's how it's being done? I wish we can get a good accounting, and there's just no oversight of what's happening, over something that we're all paying a great deal of attention to and people feel deeply about. But one of the things he said in yesterday's, when he was addressing reporters, is that what he's doing is democratic, that people did vote in Donald Trump, who did then appoint Elon Musk and his team, his Doge team, created Doge, to go into these agencies and departments to look for fraud and waste. And we already talked about those terms, fraud and waste, but to do their basic own audit. And he says what's not democratic is just this complete control that the bureaucrats, these career bureaucrats, have over government. And if the bureaucrats are able to have this control over the information, then democracy is basically meaningless.
Yeah, so I heard him say that. That is very stupid. That is a very poor understanding of how government works. And I kind of come back to the fact that this man doesn't understand basic civics, right? Because let's dive into something. And I want to start where you start. I want to pick up where you started, Mitch, It would be great to have Elon Musk in a congressional hearing. Here's Elon's problem from an intellectual point of view, and I know that he doesn't have problems, real problems like the rest of us, because he has all more money than God. But from an intellectual point of view, if what he just said is true, that that he is running a democratic process because Donald Trump was democratically elected, and then he was appointed by the democratically elected president Donald Trump to do what he's doing. If you're a presidential appointee, you have to show up to Congress and account for your actions. That's actually part of our laws. You have to divest from some of your businesses to make sure you, as an appointed government official, are not corrupt and on the take, so that we can make sure that whatever you're doing in your official government capacity isn't for the benefit of your private company. You need to put some of your businesses and organizations in a blind trust and things of that nature, right? So if you are a democratically elected official, or you are appointed by a democratically elected official, there are rules you are supposed to follow, Mr. Musk. If not, if you do not have to follow those rules, if you do not have to sit for congressional testimony, if you do not have to divest your businesses, if you're free to do whatever you want, then guess what? You're not part of the democracy. You are an oligarch who has conducted a coup d'etat in the United States. Pick one, Elon. Which one do you want to be? Because you can't have it both ways. And that is the fundamental problem with his statements right now. And it's the fundamental problem with how the media is treating this man. And I understand that most media organizations, legacy organizations especially, are scared as hell of this man. Like, I understand that they have fear of this little punk because he's so wealthy. I get it, right? But you as a journalist have to have the courage to call the man for what he is, right? Either he is a government official, in which case he is in violation of tens of laws, right? Or he's not a government official and he's got no right to the access to the information that he has, and continuing to have that access represents a junta. Pick and report accordingly.
If I could just one last time come back to these TROs, which you wrote extensively about recently, TROs, temporary restraining orders. We heard earlier this week a federal judge in New Hampshire indicate that the Trump administration was not abiding by his order to once again provide funds through the Inflation Reduction Act, especially around, I guess, grants and loans concerning issues meant to address climate change. I haven't seen the latest on that. Like, I haven't even seen like the White House say if they will now open up that funding again or not. I don't know if you've seen anything. I've looked for it, not in the last 5. I probably should have this morning. I didn't this morning, but yesterday I was trying to look like, well, what's the latest on this? Everyone stopped reporting on this. Did they do it? Are they going to do it? And anyways, about ignoring a federal judge's order. And there's some scary signs about this. J.D. Vance has said many times, the vice president has said many times, that he thinks the president should ignore, or at least suggested presidents should ignore court rulings. That there, he sees a very strong line between the executive and the judicial branches. There have been a couple of times in history that I at least know of when a president ignored this is a Supreme Court ruling, which we haven't had yet. One being Andrew Jackson. I think that was over Indian removal. I guess it's an apocryphal story in which he says John Marshall made his decision. Now let's see him enforce it. As you said, the Supreme Court doesn't have its own enforcement mechanism. It relies on the Justice Department or the state to enforce its rulings. And then the other is Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus around, I guess, a rail line between Philadelphia and Washington during the Civil War because of fear of rebellion. And the infamous Roger Taney, who wrote the Dred Scott decision, said that was illegal, but Lincoln ignored him. Those are the two instances I know of in which a ruling was completely ignored by the president. And we don't have a Supreme Court decision yet now, but this obviously, what we're looking at right now isn't such a dire situation as, say, what was happening in the Civil War. Do you see this potentially being a new precedent, the envelope being pushed right now?
Well, I mean, the two examples that you gave from Lincoln and Jackson involved war and genocide, right? And so if it's only two, so it's not a pattern, but it's two. It's an anecdote, but our two anecdotes tell us that presidents who ignore Supreme Court orders are planning war or genocide. Which one do you think Trump is planning when he is planning to ignore a court order? War or genocide? That's our anecdotal evidence about why he might do that, right? And I do slightly disagree with you, Mitch. I do think it's dire. I do think that if we are in a situation where Trump can, by fiat, not fund the government that has been appropriated by Congress, that is a usurpation of Article 1 powers, right? That's a usurpation of the separation of powers. That means that our constitutional republic, such as it is, ceases to function. If all of the money can be appropriated by Congress and the president can just ignore that, well, then our constitutional structure doesn't exist anymore, which is why I say we are not in a looming constitutional crisis. The constitutional crisis is upon us right now. In terms of a new precedent, if this is okay, the new precedent is that we have dictators. That's the new precedent, right? Like that there's and I would argue there's no going back from that, right? Because and just to be clear for anybody who is listening, if it is the case that Donald Trump can ignore Supreme Court orders when he feels like it, and then sometime in the future there is a Democratic president, I will come on this show and every show in America demanding that the Democratic president ignore the Supreme Court orders. This conservative Supreme Court, are you kidding me? If we're going to play ignoring Supreme Court orders game, then guess what, folks? Abortion back on the table, right? Because there are a whole bunch of Supreme Court orders over the past 20 years that I would like a Democratic president to just ignore. So if we're going to go down that road, that's what I'm saying. That is a Pandora's box that you do not close, right? Now, I acknowledge that the Democrats, if they ever got in power, would pathetically and weakly and stupidly try to close it, right? Like, I know how weak that party is. Oh my God, we have to restore the norms, guys. Come on, guys. We got to restore. Like, I know that's what will be somebody's primary campaign, right? Hopefully that person loses, and a person who will take the dictatorial powers given to them by Trump was most likely the person that we're getting next, right? And that's where I'll go back to Vance, right? Who is arguably the successor. Trump isn't going to live forever. I don't know. I mean, I hesitate to say that because we've obviously crossed over into some kind of hellish version of the multiverse, but assuming the laws of physics still stand, Trump is not going to live forever. But look what his successor is saying. His successor is saying, his nominal successor is saying, oh, presidents shouldn't follow court orders, right? And you can imagine, if that's the position he's staking out, you can imagine what the other people running to succeed Donald Trump will be saying. You can imagine what candidate Don Jr. or candidate Ivanka Trump will be saying if Vance is already on presidents shouldn't follow court orders, right? So again, precedentially speaking, if Trump can violate a court order, it's a wrap. That's it. We don't have court orders anymore that we are bound to respect, because you're never putting that genie back in the bottle, because again, the court doesn't have any independent enforcement authority whatsoever. And if Trump can do it, you damn well better believe that his successors are going to try to do it. And then you damn well better believe that Democrats are going to have to try to do the exact same thing.
The fact that we're even having a serious conversation about this is telling. There are other Republican Republican lawmakers in Congress who are also calling for him to ignore these court decision. And you're hearing it on Fox News as well. Some of their commentators are also saying the same thing. So the fact that this is now part of the public dialogue at large is alarming, because it was almost inconceivable just a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean they don't think they're ever going to lose again, right? That's the thing. Like the conservatives and Republicans who are pushing this do not think that there will ever be a democratic president again, and they might be right. I mean, they might be right. But if they're not, here's the other thing, right? They might be right, but they're also counting on what I said earlier. They're counting on the Democrats, if they ever get back in power, to be weak, pathetic people, right? Because that's the history of the Democratic Party, just weakness, and an unwillingness to use power maximally, right? So it's like they can do whatever they want, and they are counting on either Democrats never having power again, or if they do have power again, never using the power that they have, right? They'll never use the power maximally. They'll always be trying to restore norms and restore order. And that gives you a very asymmetric war that you're fighting, to your advantage if you're the Republicans. So I think that is part of why they're like this. But I always ask, what, again, I think about the kind of transition from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire, a lot. And why do you want to be a senator? Why do you want to be a congressman when you have no power? Like, what is it the parking? Is the parking just real good? Like, do you get good seats at the game? Is that the whole point of this? Because, like, I don't understand how you're a Republican senator, and maybe you agree with Trump, maybe you want the same things that Trump wants in terms of policies, but don't you also want to have your Senate role mean something? Don't you want there to be some kind of normal order to how this works, if for no other reason than it makes you important? Because in the world that Trump and Musk and Vance are trying to give birth to, there's that famous story of Caligula appointing his horse Incitatus to the Senate, to the Roman Senate, right? And people said that it was an indication that Caligula was crazy, but it wasn't. It was an indication that the Senate was pointless by that time. The Senate had no role by that time, right? And so I feel, are very close to J.D. Vance appointing a horse. I mean, there's already Tommy Tuberville, so appointing another horse to the Senate, and it just not mattering because all of those positions are, are in name only and carry no more actual power. And it's amazing to me that Republican senators and Republican congresspeople seem to want to live in that world. Like, that's just, and I'm not being facetious. Like, it is actually mind bending to me that you spend all of your life trying to get in power, and now you have power and you're giving it away to an orange dictator. Because why? Why are you doing that? Right? What's the point?
I was a congressional reporter 20 years ago, and then there was this sort of spirit where the legislative branch, our role, it wasn't just we're Republicans, it was also that we're members of Congress, and the role that Congress plays is important. In your latest piece, again, how Trump could remake the Supreme Court for a generation, as we're talking about Donald Trump potentially ignoring a Supreme Court order, which that hasn't happened yet. But you didn't seem to give much faith that the Supreme Court would rule against Donald Trump anyways. In most cases, not all. I think you mentioned you do think that they'll probably rule against Trump in his attempt to redefine basically birthright citizenship. But largely, you didn't give the Supreme Court much. You didn't seem to have a lot of confidence in the Supreme Court of pushing back against Donald Trump. And I wonder if the same argument could be made there. And I do wonder about just Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, who has ruled, who has made against Donald Trump, has been in opinions that were against Donald Trump. Even some of Donald Trump's own appointees have at times ruled against what the Trump administration would want. These are people that are not beholden to Donald Trump anymore because they are lifetime positions that these justices serve. And you would think that there is this desire for the court to maintain its own sense of power. It doesn't want to and the court, as the president has become more powerful over the years, so has the court, right? All of this at the expense of Congress. But the court and the presidency has become more powerful. But then I guess counter to that, what I'm saying there, it is interesting because I know when John Roberts was a lawyer in the Department of Justice during the Reagan years. He was, and so was Alito. They were big proponents of this theory known as the unitary executive theory, which is that the president has sole and absolute authority over the executive branch. You don't have faith. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You don't have faith in this court to try to push back against Donald Trump?
Oh, hell no. Hell no. No, this court is all in the tank for Donald Trump. And when you say that Roberts has sometimes ruled against them, only during during the 2020 coup, right? Only when Trump was trying to steal an election that he already lost was Roberts really kind of like, come on, Mr. Trump, like enough of that. Just about everything else, Roberts has given him what he wants. He gave him the Muslim ban, gave him 3 shots to get it right. He gave Trump the 14th Amendment case, which allowed him to run for president in the first place, even though that was arguably in violation of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And the biggest thing is that he gave him absolute immunity for official acts. And I can't, one of my friends, Ian Millhiser on Vox says, and it's the best analogy, so I always use it now, seeing the court give Trump absolute immunity is like learning that your kid's 3rd grade teacher has been giving your daughter cocaine. Nothing. You can't trust anything after that, right? You can't know anything after that, because doing that one thing is such a violation of everything basic and good and decent in this world that you then have to assume that any future decision, whether it's good or bad, is motivated out of something that you cannot possibly understand, right? And I think that's where after the immunity decision, the idea that this court is in any way a check or balance against Donald Trump you just can't convince me of that, because they gave the man absolute immunity from prosecution of criminal acts, an idea that has absolutely no precedent in anything in American law, truly putting the president as the one person above all other laws, which is this antithetical to the way the Constitution was structured. I can't. That's ball game to me in terms of this court's ability or desire to stand up to Trump. Now, in particular, what I feel is that this court, Roberts especially, has made a business decision, right? It's one of those kind of, in the sport, the guy's coming at you and you make the business decision to step out of bounds instead of taking that hit, right? Live to fight another play, right? And that's where Roberts is. His business decision, I believe, is to ride Trump out. Roberts is 70. He's younger than Trump. His court is, for the most part, younger than Trump, especially if they can replace Alito and Thomas in this term. They'll have a young 6-3 majority that will outlive Trump. That will outlive this president, which may not want to enforce their orders anyway, right? If they can get through these 4 years without having their order directly violated by Trump, and the way you do that is to give Trump what he wants, then while accruing more and more power to themselves, then when the next guy comes, then Vance doesn't have that precedent of ignoring Supreme Court orders. Or maybe a Democrat wins, and we know that they are complicit and weak, right? So then the court kind of reemerges after sheltering itself during the Trump administration as, again, the most powerful branch of government once again. And that is what Roberts is trying to do. He's trying to navigate the Trump administration without getting his own court made a fool of. I think that's his only real concern. And that's going to mean going along with Trump 90% of the time, right? 95% of the time, they'll give that man what he wants because they're trying to survive Trump because they think that they'll come out more powerful on the other side. And that is, to finish your thought on the unitary executive theory, that is the special sauce of unitary executive theory. When we say it and we talk about it, it sounds like, oh my God, the Supreme Court is giving the president so much power. No, they ain't. They're giving themselves so much power. Mitch, you said it. Who's the kid getting stuffed in the locker? It's Congress. So what the court is saying with the unitary executive theory is that the president, not Congress, has all the power. And we, not Congress, are the only people that can tell the president no. That's the special sauce of unitary executive theory. Because now, how do I know if the president can or can't do something that he executive orders, right? Not an act of Congress. Congress has no power. Only the court can tell the president no under the unitary executive theory. And that is a power grab for them. That is a power grab for the court against Congress, just like their president is grabbing power from Congress, right? So it's Congress that gets the short straw here, and that's what this court wants.
And Congress, of the three branches of government, is the most democratic of the three.
It's supposed to be the most important.
Yeah. First among equals. I've heard it described as the first among equals.
Right? There's a reason why it's Article 1, folks, right? Yeah, because as you say, Mitch, the Congress is the most democratically responsive branch of government. The House obviously is elected every 2 years. The Senate, not a particularly democratic branch because it gives power to land instead of people, and we can, that's a whole different problem. But yeah, Congress is supposed to be where the action's at. The executive is not supposed to make laws. They're just supposed to enforce laws. I mean, like structurally, Congress is where it's at, but Congress has, and this has been, you could go all the way back to Lincoln, quite frankly, in terms of the erosion of congressional power, right? Obviously, when you're in a wartime situation, Congress takes the back seat. Depending on how Republican your family is, they might trace it to FDR, right? FDR, a hugely important, hugely powerful four-term president that stripped power from Congress.
Yeah, people called him a dictator. People called him
never before seen, right?
People called him a dictator in his time.
Right? People who were really fans of Congress thought that FDR was a real bad dude, right? So like you can, wherever you want to start the clock, Reagan, obviously, like wherever you want to start the clock, congressional power has been eroding for some time, but usually Congress has been in on it, right? Usually Congress has been the one to give away its power. And I think that we're seeing the consequences of decades of that now, where Congress is almost ceremonial, as opposed to being where the true power of our government lies, as it should.
And finally, and I appreciate you taking so much time this morning with us. Do you see a counter to this trend?
Mitch, the American people did this. The American people can get us out of it. All power in this country still flows up from the people. And so again, you got to understand that people wanted Trump, and he doesn't have a mandate, whatever. I know that people on my side like to point out that he doesn't have a mandate. I don't think that's just a word. I don't think it matters. He has a majority, right? And as long as he has a majority, he will keep doing this. As long as a majority of Americans want this, they'll keep getting it, and they're going to keep getting it until they realize that it's not something they should want. And once that happens, if we ever get to a point where a majority of Americans reject this, a Democratic president has not won the white vote since 1964. 1964 is when we passed the Civil Rights Act. If a majority of white Americans ever get over that, if a majority of white women could figure out that maybe voting for a rapist, misogynist person isn't the best idea in the world, if we could ever move past that, then we'd have a conversation about what the response would be. Obviously, Trump is doing all of this right now with his highest approval ratings ever. At the point where he does not have high approval ratings, he's still going to do it. Right? Like, I don't think that he cares anymore about his approval ratings, other than, his ego. He'll lie. He'll say, actually my approval rating is 90% if you whatever. He'll find a Rasmussen poll to do that for him. But like, at some point, people have to reject what he's doing before I can even start credibly thinking about what the response is going to be, right? Because first you have to get people, again, to not want this. As long as they want this, they'll keep getting it.
Elie Mystal has been our guest. Elie Mystal is the nation's justice correspondent, host of his legal podcast, Contempt of Court, author of the book, Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, also the author of the cover piece for the latest edition of The Nation magazine called How Trump Could Remake the Supreme Court for a Generation. His forthcoming book is called Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. It's out in March, and we hope he'll return to talk to us about it. Elie Mystal, it's been a great pleasure, and I thank you very much for taking this time to join us today.
Thank you for having me, Mitch.